Welcome to Creators Cafe. I'm your host, Jessica Payne. I'm a performer, performance coach, and multi-hyphenate creator. I'm going to be bringing you conversations with some of my favorite creators where we talk about the sublime and the specifics of the creative journey. So grab a drink, get cozy. Let's go. My guest, Stephen Harrick, is a writer, director, actor, teacher, and scholar based in the St. Louis area. Stephen's comics have been published by GreyHaven Comics and Ink and Drink Comics, as well as the self-published Pulp-Sized Comics with art by John King and Rhyan Sollace, and Dirt Sheet, co-created with John King. Stephen is a smarty pants. He has his PhD in theater from Bowling Green State University and has published in Sporting Performance, Politics and Play, Theater Journal, Theater History Studies, New England Theater Journal, Theater Topics, Etudes, and he's also written extensively on comics, publishing with The Beat and Straight Up magazine, as well as presenting in the Comic Studies Society's annual conference. Along with all of that, he's worked in professional and university theaters all over the United States as a director, actor, and dramatist. Stephen has taught theater, performance, comics, and literature at Central Michigan University, Defiance College, Ohio Northern University, and Bowling Green State University. Please enjoy my conversation with a dear friend, Stephen Harrick. Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome, Stephen Harrick, to the Creators Cafe.
Thank you.
Cheers. Stephen is a listener to the show, which I appreciate, in addition to being a long-time friend. And he has very anti-slurping noises on audio, so I will be slurping more than usual just to, dig the screw in there and provoke when possible.
Sounds great.
So I apologize for everyone else who is anti-slurping, because it's going to be a rough ride here. So, Stephen Harrick, hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Jess.
So you are in town in LA just for a short break here from
St. Louis, yes.
And so we had met back at Western Illinois University many eons ago. But you've done lots of things in the creative arts prior to then and since then. So how do you think of yourself as a creator?
I think of myself, I identify as a writer, a director, sometimes actor, a teacher, and a scholar.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I would think of you in all of those roles as well. Great, so we'll dive into those. First of all, tell me what you're drinking.
I'm drinking Diet Coke from the One Hotel.
Yeah, which we made a special trip to.
Yes, thank you. Lovely. I appreciated that. It was a lovely place to visit.
Yeah.
In spite of Gil not being there.
I know. Hi, Gil.
We missed you.
We missed you. Yeah. And I was drinking a delicious ice mocha from one cafe, which I spilled in the 30 seconds before we were starting recording all over my chair, my pants, the floor, and the microphone. So if you're watching, you'll see lots of towels on my chair. And if not, just know that I'm squishy.
I've been thinking about this moment of you spilling the coffee all over the table, all over the chair, all over the rug, the floor, got on you.
Yeah.
And how you and I react very differently to unexpected, I don't want to say catastrophe, but unexpected, unwelcome moments like that.
Yeah.
Because I think that would ruin my day. And I genuinely thought, we're not going to record this podcast now, because I would be so upset about it. I would be so flustered by that.
Got it.
And how you were laughing about it.
Yeah.
And very pragmatic and dealt with it with grace and aplomb. And it really made me think about how we're such different creators. And I guess as different people, but how we approach creativity differently.
Yeah.
And how I aspire to that, to how you handle that kind of situation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was, it was unwelcome. Yeah, I spilled sticky liquid everywhere, including on my expensive microphone and myself and the floor and the chair I'm about to sit on. So it was in fact unwelcome. But yeah, I guess, I don't know. I have learned that I am going to screw up many times and many ways, and it will not be ideal. And that, I guess the important thing is to keep the important thing. And here it's you and talking to you, and I have another microphone, and that is a backup, and I can sit on a towel and it's fine. So it's also, I think after liver donation surgery, once you've had a couple of huge, big things like that, it just puts sticky microphones into perspective in a nice way as well. So, but I think you also are naturally talented in a more detailed manner, perhaps, like your execution and the process-oriented side of things is where you really shine. And for me, I think it's more of the overall gestalt, perhaps. And so I wonder if that's part of the difference of us as creators, too, is just where our strengths lie.
Sure.
Also, I've dealt with a lot of sticky children and on tours when you're changing in in subpar ideal places, and just, you deal with a lot of stuff on the road, I think, as well. So that's helped.
It's interesting that you mentioned the process part, because the process is the most interesting aspect of creativity to me.
Yeah.
As you and I know, they may not know, we met doing theater together, studying theater and creating theater. And at some point I realized the most interesting part of creating theater was rehearsing. By the time the production, the project, whatever it might be, is performance ready, I found myself kind of bored by it, whether I was an actor or a director or a writer, designer, designed a couple of things pretty badly. And whenever it got to that point, the creative part was largely over because the project was in place. To me, the most exciting part was finding it, was the journey.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because I have found myself also over time trending towards doing more film and TV projects, or things like the podcast, or things that have perhaps more immediacy than perfection in the details, because I think I'm also drawn to that nowness of the creation. And I think ideally theater has it, but how it's executed currently, it's sometimes, I don't want to say it's over-rehearsed, but there is sometimes something lost in the magic of the process about 3/4 of the way through. So
yeah, you're right.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I guess the last project we worked on together was you directed me into production of Tape. So let's fly back in time to that. What do you remember from that, looking back on it?
Tape is a taught drama by Stephen Belber, 3-character play written or produced first, I think, in around 2000. And just for the viewers and listeners who don't know, Tape is about 3 old friends who get together, have a mini reunion after not visiting each other for a long time, and one character brings up a traumatic, violent experience that another possibly perpetrated on one of the people in the group, and the 3 of them have to relive it and unpack it and come to terms with it however they can. And I'm not going to talk too much about it. You can go read it or watch it. There is a film version of it. Yeah. And what I liked about that was, I think in some ways, since there are these different perspectives, Rashomon style, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't real, what might have been imagined or misremembered, was kind of interesting for that creative process. So we ended up talking a lot throughout the rehearsal process, myself as the director and the cast members, and the designers as well, talking about what was correct for the design. And it was really exciting to find those moments and not entirely know what the actors had decided.
Yeah, I appreciated that you really gave us a lot of guidance, but then a lot of freedom to play in the gray there. And so even us as actors, we made our own decisions, but we did not communicate the end result to everybody else.
Yeah.
And so it really felt more true to life of you don't know what people's secrets or interior monologue is.
Yeah, there was one moment that stands out with you and I, in which I inquired to you if you thought perhaps the character you were playing might have been pregnant or might have lived with depression. And you were in agreement that those were relevant in terms of discussing the character's experience.
Yeah.
And I never knew based on that discussion, but you told me in your performance. And that was really exciting. That was very fulfilling for me as an artist.
To see the revelation as opposed to be kind of spoon-fed.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice. I also really liked about that one that it felt kind of naturalistic in that it was a very intimate space done very close to the audience. And did we do it in the round?
We did it in the round, yeah.
I wasn't sure if it was a round or just very close to the round. And so the blocking was really choreographed in a natural but very thoughtful way. So it felt like this intimate, vulnerable dance the whole time. It was cool.
And I think that we did ourselves a favor, for the most part, by having it in a small space.
Yes.
It was very small and compact. I talked about the metaphor with the designers about rats fighting in a rat hole.
I'm glad I didn't know that because I pictured myself as much more elegant than a rat. And I think that was part of the fun of that character for me was somebody who had felt like they had dug themselves up out of circumstances and had risen past something. So that's cool to hear now.
Right, yeah. I think she's a successful lawyer.
Yeah. ADA in Michigan, yeah.
So the fact that I was able to have those conversations and not know exactly what everyone was deciding, but those decisions communicated to me what they were thinking, and it was really satisfying, that experience.
Nice.
I'm so glad we were able to do it together.
Me too. Yeah. What else have you directed since then that you really enjoyed process-wise?
The last play I directed opened and closed in February 2020.
Ouch.
I've made a deliberate choice to avoid entering the rehearsal room or a creative theater space since the pandemic. And I know that it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I have flown since then, so I am in very close quarters with people, but I've decided that's not the right choice for me right now to create. So I directed a play in 2020, right before everything shut down.
Yeah.
Called The Wedding Guest by Steve Moulds. Okay. It's a wonderful, funny play about two characters getting married and their loved ones and a distant relative who may or may not show up and how they all respond to that. Okay. And finding the different dynamics and how each character relates to that wedding guest was a unique experience because they all had different expectations and different desires. They all had different wishes.
So you're really playing the objective and the psychology of the characters around an unseen character.
And the character does show up. The character never speaks. So whatever they want, they write onto that character.
Ooh, so it's about projection. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a waiting for Guffman where Guffman shows up
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Same with
Godot.
Or The Stronger
I don't know that
by
one.
Strindberg, in which one character speaks this entire long monologue to another character, and she never responds verbally, but it's just basically a long monologue.
Yeah, it's
And-
always interesting to play the opposite of that then,
Yes.
kind of like with tape of building things in without literally revealing them is
Yes.
so much more interesting anyway.
And finding those moments and those goals with the actors. And I was working with student actors, so they were also learning their craft and what works for them
Yeah.
as they were creating these characters was really satisfying.
Yeah. Okay, so you went on from when we worked together and then got your doctorate.
It did, yes.
And so this was part of this directing project was then many steps down the road in conjunction with that.
Correct.
So tell me about the process of getting a doctorate and how that was for you. Maybe touch on your dissertation and what, the field is changing, and what was true for people that were our professors is such a different world than people in our kind of era. So what's it been like for you?
Sure. The degree I have is a PhD in theater. And after you and I worked together, I went on to get a master's degree and a PhD, both in theater from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And while I was there, I wrote a lot of scholarship. I did a lot of research and wound up selecting everyone earning a doctorate has to create some sort of lengthy project, often by writing a doctoral dissertation. And mine was a history of Blue Man Group, as you know.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a history of Blue Man Group through 2001, and I saw that as a real turning point for the organization. It was, by and large, a traditional history of the group, the creators, and while I was writing it, I was tracking the ways in which Blue Man Group moved away from its initial ideals, I think, in terms of an avant-garde frame of mind, an avant-garde philosophy. And it moved more and more towards the popular. It got a lot less political. And by the time Blue Man Group was regularly appearing on our televisions, it had completely changed and evolved into something very different than it was from its original founders. So much so that in the original public performance Blue Man Group gave in 1988, there were 9 blue men and women who spoke. And for anyone watching this now, Blue Man Group contains 3 blue men who don't speak verbally.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of what you would think of when you think of it now.
Sure.
That's wild to know it became so commercialized so quickly.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And I think that was necessary to recording albums and releasing T-shirts and selling out in Las Vegas and national tours and ultimately international tours.
What pulled you towards that as a project in the first place?
I was first and foremost a fan of Blue Man Group. I had seen them live well before I started writing about them and knew their music, knew their work, and was looking for a research project for a class on visual rhetoric that Gary Heba taught. Hi, Gary.
Nice.
He won't be watching this
But
unless
hi.
I reach out to him. I could, yeah.
Absolutely.
And there was something about Blue Man Group that stood out to me for looking at the visual in their work. And I happened to notice that there wasn't a ton on Blue Man Group that had been written that was scholarly.
Right.
There's a lot in the popular press, in magazines and newspapers, but in terms of the academic writing, there wasn't a ton. And I thought that was a gap for such a popular group.
Yeah.
I thought there ought to be more. And so I focused on them in one class, and then I kept on interrogating Blue Man Group.
Worry the bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wound up writing my dissertation as a history of Blue Man Group and finished that in 2015. And then in 2016, I started teaching theater at Central Michigan University, where I taught for several years and directed some plays there, including The Wedding Guest.
Great. You made a big switch after the beginning of the pandemic. So once you were directing, once you were teaching, and so many of us transitioned in that time period. What did you do and how did it happen?
I started writing comics.
Yeah.
And I had done that before the pandemic.
Okay.
I had started getting interested in writing comics around 2012, 2013. I think I wrote my first script that was illustrated in maybe 2014 or 2015. And I haven't looked back since. I love it. I've been a lifelong fan of comics, comic strips, comic books, graphic novels, webcomics. I love them all. Editorial comics. I think they're just great. The storytelling with words and pictures to tell a succinct story, to make a gag, to take us on a journey. It's really exciting. And as I'd mentioned before, I'm not terribly enthused to return to the rehearsal room. Even though I'm fully boosted, I feel very comfortable with that. I'm just not ready to return to that type of creating in what are relatively close quarters. So I've been collaborating with others in different ways by making comics, and I write them. I do not draw them yet.
Okay.
That's a goal.
Okay.
And I've written for a lot of different artists, a lot of different types of stories. It's been really fulfilling. It is collaborative in similar ways that creating theater is, because I think that I've directed a lot of plays, and I've acted in a lot, and I've written a few. Written some short plays, some sketch comedy, some monologues. In comics, the director is the artist. The artist is the one who takes us on that journey, I'd say, more than the writer.
Okay.
And no disrespect to comics writers. Don't at me. But the artist is really serving as the director, leading the eye. And comics are a visual medium. They're cinematic. Writers and artists of comics end up talking a lot about framing, shot by shot, perspective, angles, etc. So it does use the language of cinema. So
yeah, I was interested to read some of your scripts that you had sent, that I was surprised how visually similar it was to an excellently written script that is giving a lot of prescriptive visuals. I guess I hadn't realized, because my familiarity with comics is more from people that maybe do both, and so that's happening internally as opposed to on the written page. So it was really cool to see your clear storytelling, but also the visuals that you incorporate into the writing.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I have written some scripts that have a lot of prescriptive images and some that are more open to interpretation. It kind of depends on the artist. Mm-hmm. I like to write with a specific artist in mind.
Okay.
I typically don't start writing a script without an artist attached to the project.
That makes sense because yours have such different visual tones and story tones that it makes sense that you've got that in mind of who you're writing for and with. Yeah.
Yeah. So because of that, the detailed panel descriptions, I think, help the artist along to find what works. And of course, sometimes artists will add more panels than I wrote. And I'm fine with that because never has an artist added more panels and made the project worse.
Oh, that's good. That's
At
not...
least in one of my projects. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way.
That's not always true with writing of like, if I'm adding more words, it's not necessarily getting better. So that's funny to hear. What's the difference when you're approaching writing for comics? What's the kind of technique storytelling wise? How do you come about that?
Structurally, it's very similar to writing a play or, as I understand, a screenplay. I've never written a proper screenplay, but the mechanics are much the same. The difference is, by and large, the writer is writing for a readership of one. Because more often than not, the only person who's going to read the script is the artist. If there's a person involved in doing the digital coloring, the lettering, that's a little different. But you're writing a script for very, very few people to ever encounter.
That's interesting, yeah.
Because it's not about the script. Sometimes you'll see a screenplay published. A lot of times you'll see a stage play published, dramatic script. That's how we encounter those works often. But not the comic script. It's actually quite rare. It'll sometimes appear as back matter in a published comic.
Yeah.
Those comics tend to be very popular. And it's a way of seeing the creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was cool for me to get to kind of peek behind the doors there to see that as well. So let's talk about your comics. What have you done recently? Or what are you excited about?
My most recent comic that I've written is a project titled Dirt Sheet. DIRTSHEET.
Okay.
It's 2 words. And Dirt Sheet refers to periodical on professional wrestling that gave a lot of inside scoop on wrestling, kind of like a backstage pass into wrestling, interviews, what's going on with the wrestlers, etc.
Okay.
And so my friend John King, and I have co-created this comic, Dirt Sheet.
Okay.
We've done 2 issues already, and they are very small. I've got a copy here.
Okay.
So you see how small it is.
That's so small.
Yeah.
It's like a postcard kind of size.
Yes, it is very much postcard size, but it is sequential art.
Okay.
I know that's small on the camera,
Yeah.
but you see that there are panels. It's not just a single panel per page.
So it opens up kind of like a little book
Yes.
that are postcard size pages.
We would call this a mini comic.
Okay.
And it's self-published.
Okay. Can I see it?
Of course.
Thank you.
Dirt Sheet is about professional wrestling. Specifically, it exists in this parallel universe in which professional wrestling determines political decisions. So political parties will hire professional wrestlers to defend or further a cause.
Yeah.
So oftentimes a match in this story will determine a Supreme Court justice.
That's hilarious.
Who is going to be elected, what issues are going to go one way or another. I think one story involves a canal, if it's going to happen or not.
Yeah.
And the professional wrestlers work to make sure it happens or doesn't happen for the world.
So when you're coming up with a concept like that, is that you in conjunction with the artist, or is it you first, or you're writing to something they came up with, or is it different every project?
It's certainly different with different projects and different with other artists. John and I happen to be very good friends, and we've collaborated before on other comics projects. So this came from many conversations about professional wrestling. We both like wrestling. He is a fiend for professional wrestling.
Okay.
And he and I were talking about wrestling and how it's so hyper ridiculous.
Yeah, it's inherently theatrical.
Yeah.
In nature, yeah.
And so we wanted to do something even further than that.
Yeah.
And we couldn't make it more ridiculous in terms of the content. It's already
Yeah.
absurd enough.
Yeah.
So we decided, I think an interesting way is to give it real life consequences.
Yeah.
So we've done that. And the biggest wrestlers are the ones who decide who the president is.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
The heavyweight grand champion.
But they are not the ones serving.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just they're deciding.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like someone sending a army to war
Exactly.
on their behalf. It's just on a theatrical kind of stage.
Yes.
All right. What else do you have?
I have, this is Pulp-Sized Comics. This is
I really love this design.
my creator-owned title that I wrote all the stories in.
Yeah.
And eagle-eyed viewers might notice the art here looks similar to that in Dirt Sheet. That's because John King drew the cover. He drew some of the art in here. There are 3 different stories in here.
Okay.
That are all pulpy in nature. That's why I decided to call it Pulp-Sized Comics.
Yeah.
And
If somebody doesn't know, can you describe pulpy as a literary genre?
sure, pulp, you can take a look at that. You can set it over there if you'd like. Pulp is genre stories, oftentimes relying on good and evil tropes. So there's usually a very clear hero, a very clear villain. I'm sure if you think of stories like Star Wars, they're rooted in pulp.
Yeah. It has a little bit of the Dame Walked In kind of Dick Tracy aesthetic to the world as well, which is fun.
And I would say that Captain America and Batman are rooted in a pulp aesthetic as well.
That makes sense.
So I've got 3 stories in here. One's a Western, very pulpy. One is kind of a quasi-horror, and one is a crime noir.
Yeah, I like that noir style is probably the one I was referencing. Yeah. Yeah, it's very cool. And I like the differences between them, but also the unification within this issue. So what does it mean to be a self-publisher in the comics world? How do you go about that? How do you publish? What does that really mean? And then does that take you to cons? Or how does that world happen for you?
Yeah, you can certainly take the work that you've created. In this case, different creators and I, we co-created those stories. And John King did the art for the cover, and he helped actually format the book for me. And then I sent the whole thing off as a PDF to Comics Wellspring. There are a lot of different self-publishers, a lot of printers that do that kind of thing. I was happy with Comics Wellspring.
Okay.
And
so if somebody wanted to do their own comic book, that's a route they could take, is like visually create it or write it and work with somebody and research a place like Comics Wellspring.
yes.
That's
and
cool.
There are a lot of those places online.
Yeah.
You just have to decide what's best for your project.
Yeah.
They have a lot of different price points for different sizes, which I found appealing. I wound up going with the traditional comic book size for that project, which I'm pleased with. I've ordered from them a couple of times, been really happy with the results, and I wind up taking Pulp-Sized Comics and other projects, including Dirt Sheet, to different conventions that I appear at and sell them. And usually it's to people who have never heard of me or my work, and they're interested in something, some aspect of it.
Yeah.
Which is always nice. I'm becoming a comics writer, one reader at a time, basically.
Mm-hmm. What's it like going to a comic convention as a creator, but as an independent creator?
It can feel a little lonely at times, but the community's pretty welcoming for the most part. I have done a lot of conventions over the years, before the pandemic and several since then, and it's always a fulfilling experience, even if the sales are soft, because there's some experience, some interaction with a fan, something that is gratifying and makes it worth it. One that I did recently, and it's a little different because I didn't have a table. Normally when I go to conventions, I have a table, I'm selling my books to passersby.
Yeah.
Or they're ignoring me, which happens more often. I attended San Diego ComiCon, which is known as ComiCon International. That was earlier this year, July 2023. And this came from a unique experience for me. I don't know if it was when my father was still ill or when he died. I wrote a bucket list. I'd never done that before.
Okay.
And thought about different things I'd like to do before I pass. I was feeling my mortality.
Sure.
And I was writing about my spiritual well-being and health and some tangible goals, like develop a drawing style that I'm comfortable with, become a homeowner, and one of them was participate in Comic-Con International in San Diego, which I ended up doing, and I met a lot of people there, made a lot of connections, and it became clear that type of experience is not the experience I'm really chasing.
So you did the bucket list item, and you also found out that's not the end game.
Right, that's not really the venue for me. Because it's so big, there are certainly some opportunities there.
Yeah.
But I knew creating comics for a Marvel or a DC with those corporate characters, those well-known icons, that wasn't something I wanted to do. I thought I might do some version of that, and I realized that's not what drives me. I don't really have an aspiration to do that, and I don't think I knew that until I went to Comic-Con in San Diego. So I have begun to do some different stuff. Dirt Sheet is one of them. I think that's been a real fortifying experience, working with a good friend. But I've done something I've never done before, which is I started working on a non-fiction comic project.
Yeah, so tell us about how that got started. What prompted that particular idea?
I would say it was around the beginning of the pandemic, I was thinking about how in times of crisis and catastrophe, people wind up returning again and again to the theater. And this is the case with people who experience the Holocaust. People in camps would perform plays. Japanese American internment camps, the people living there would put on plays. I found this a recurring event, a recurring experience, and was thinking, how do we make sense of the pandemic through theater? And I didn't realize at the time that it wasn't by creating theater, it was by recounting this, by researching it. So I've been doing research on different ways that happens, and I want to write a comic about it. So I started doing research on a pretty well-known event in 1849, pretty well-known for theater historians, I should say.
Small world, but distinct.
It is small,
distinct.
If you mention the year 1849 to a theater historian, they would know exactly what it is.
Okay.
It's almost as recognizable as what we might think of in 1776.
Got it.
It's quite well known.
Okay.
And it was in New York City at the Astor Place Opera House. Edwin Forrest, an American actor, and William Charles Macready, an English actor. They were both playing Macbeth in New York at the same time. And they had a rivalry back and forth in the press, and it evolved and turned nasty, and there was a riot at the Astor Place Opera House where William Charles Macready was performing Macbeth, and something like 24 people died, were killed in this riot, and more were severely injured.
Yeah.
Neither Macready nor Forrest died. They both survived. Their careers survived. And a lot of people wound up losing their lives. And I wanted to make sense of that, if I could,
Okay.
through comics. So I started researching it, and I'm in the early stages of writing a script about it for an artist who I've worked with previously, but never on a full comic. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's a cool project.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah. Matthew Miller is his name.
All right. And then you also had talked about something which I don't know, I wasn't aware of, so other people might want to know about it, which is the Free Comic Day in the spring. Can you just talk about the project you did for that and what that is so people could check it out next year?
Sure. Free Comic Book Day is the first Saturday in May every year.
Okay.
Except for the pandemic. Things got messed up that year.
Sure.
But I think it was just 1 year that it was a little different.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years. I actually don't remember.
Okay.
The internet will tell me. And comic stores all across the United States will buy comics from different publishers and give them away for free. So you can go to a comic shop wherever you live and most likely be able to get at least usually 3 comic books for free that day. Well, a lot of independent creators end up making their own Free Comic Book Day versions of their own works. So a friend of mine, Chloe Leslie, she and I created a short comic together about anthropomorphic pieces of candy going to a big festival and the trials and tribulations they experience. And that was given out to as many people as were interested. So much so that when she gave it away, she gave away all the copies of it. I don't even have a physical copy of it.
Wildly successful.
Yes.
Yeah.
It sold out.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I got to see the digital version.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, with all of this in mind, what is your creator's challenge for my audience?
This has been the one I've dreaded the most.
Excellent. Let's dive in.
it's important for people to step out of their comfort zones. So I think my challenge is to do something you don't normally do, whether it be speak in public or sing, dance, write, draw, whatever that might be for someone.
Okay, so it's giving yourself an audience.
Yes, a readership, an audience, spectators, someone. Obviously in a safe space. If you're doing this for complete strangers in public, you can't control how they'll respond or how you might feel from that. But I've been drawing something I don't normally do a lot recently being in 2023, and it's bad. It's really not good compared to comic book artists I work with.
Right.
I'd like to be able to draw better than I do. So showing that to people has been a real big hurdle for me. And I've done that a bit earlier this year. And doing that for someone is the challenge. It's not just doing it. It's not simply stepping outside your comfort zone, but giving it stakes.
Great. Okay. So create something that's outside of your comfort zone and then present it to an audience.
Yes.
I love it.
A readership, viewer, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Great. Fantastic. And where can people find you?
They can find me on Facebook, Instagram at Stephen Harrick. You can email me at stephenharrickcomics@gmail.com. That's Stephen, STEPHEN, HARRICK, comics, COMICS, @gmail. One of my goals for the following year, for the upcoming year, is to create a web store, to develop more of a web presence where people can buy my work, where they don't have to just email me or direct message me.
Okay.
So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I don't do Twitter.
X now.
Nope. I refuse to give that any attention.
Fair. And do you have any last thoughts?
This has been great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You know you're getting a big slurp.
I've really enjoyed this. This has been great in spite of the fact that we didn't get this from Gil.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Gil.
Gil.
Come on, man. Okay. Cheers. Thank you,
Cheers.
Stephen.
Thank you.
Join the community and share your creative challenges on Instagram and Facebook at Creators Cafe by Kika Labs. And also check out my website, kikalabs.com, KIKALABS.com, to sign up for the mailing list so you always know when a new podcast is released, and to check out my coaching and digital courses to help you be a more confident and joyful creator. Yep. Okay, let's do our cheers, my friend.
Can I start it off? Bum, bum, bum. That's enough.
That was great, though.